Struggle with doubts? Of course you do. You're a liar if you don't. Everybody walks through seasons of greater or lesser shaking. The work of the Holy Spirit in the hour of trial is to preserve you from faith-destroying doubt.
Well, good morning. My name is Tim Barnett, and I am a full-time Christian apologist. Anyone know what a Christian apologist is? Show of hands. Okay, some of you. Good. A Christian apologist is not someone who goes around saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm a Christian, please forgive me." No, we make other people sorry we're Christians, right? No, we don't do that either. That is not what we do, although some are jerks. We want to stay away from those people, okay? No, a Christian apologist is someone who defends the Christian faith, okay? They make the case for Christianity, and so that's what I get to do as a full-time job now for the last 7 or 8 years. Before that, I was a full-time high school science and math teacher. Everyone say, ew. Like, who would want to do that, right? Well, I did, and I actually had a good time doing it. And the Lord provided a way for me to do this ministry full time. And one of the ministries that I work for is Stand to Reason. Stand to Reason is an apologetics ministry, and what we do is we train Christians. And one of the really exciting things that we've been doing for the last number of years, and it just keeps growing, is the Reality Apologetics Student Conference. Anyone familiar with the Reality Apologetics Student Conference? You know, we had that right here. This place was totally packed out this weekend. Okay, we're talking 1,300 young people. Like every seat, in this room, packed out. We actually had people watching in the loft, right? It's a loft. The overflow, I mean, it was just incredible. And here's what I want to do. I want to thank you, the church, okay, for making this happen. Stand to Reason, this ministry, we couldn't do the Reality Conference without partnering with churches like yours and without volunteers. There was, I think, like 100 volunteers, like you guys. In fact, everywhere we turned, it was like, there's a volunteer helping me, you know? It was awesome. It was like, can I do this for you? Can I do that for you? It was just wonderful. And just know that because of the work that was done this weekend, because of our partnership, we were able to reach these kids to know God better and to leave this place, hopefully with a stronger and lasting faith. I think that what happened this weekend will have eternal impact. And so it's really cool. I just want you to give yourselves a hand for that. Very, very cool. Now, we actually, you guys are working on a series on doubt, which is really cool because this is one of the topics I like to address. And so kind of coming along with your sermon series, we're gonna talk about doubt this morning. But I have a story to start with, okay? It's actually a true story. This is not made up. A few years ago, I was celebrating my wife's birthday. Now, it's really cool. My wife and my birthday are right next to each other. April 28th, April 29th. I will never forget my wife's birthday, okay? And because it's right next to mine. In fact, it's more like a gift exchange when we have our birthdays. Like, hey, what did you get me? What did I get you? Okay. And we're celebrating my wife's birthday. And my daughter, Juliana, she was 6 years old at the time. She gets this really quizzical look on her face. And she says, "Dad, what's a 1-2 smell like?" And I mean, okay, I'm confused at this point. And I say, "Honey, 1 and 2 are numbers, and numbers don't have a smell." Now, technically, she was making a category mistake, but my wife says I'm not allowed to like call out my kids' logical fallacies when they're like 6 years old. Okay, so we left that. "Honey, 1 and 2 are numbers. Numbers don't have a smell." And then she looks at me, confused, and she says, "No, Dad, you don't get it. What's a 1-2 smell like?" Now, repeating the question didn't help me, right? Have you ever been in that situation? And then finally, my daughter, Jocelyn, who was 4 at the time, she's witnessing our communication stalemate, okay? And she says, Dad, you look like a monkey and you smell like one too. So what's a 1-2 smell like? Sometimes it takes the 4-year-old to help the parents out, right? Now, here's the point. We all have questions. We all have questions. And it starts when we're really young with questions like, what's a 1-2 smell like? Or why is the sky blue? You know, those kinds of questions. And as we get older, the questions get much deeper. Questions like, is there meaning and purpose to life? And why am I here? And does God exist? If God exists, why is there evil in the world? And what happens after we die? You know, those big questions. And as we begin to find answers to those questions, they begin to form our set of beliefs. And those set of beliefs we call our worldview. And then something inevitably happens. It's going to happen where you begin to doubt some of those beliefs. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? Have you ever asked yourself that question? I know I have. You know, sometimes we are just overcome with confidence about our beliefs, our convictions, but other times, if we're honest, we're overcome with uncertainty about our convictions. We begin to doubt. What if I'm wrong? You know, a lot of young people are asking that question. Here's how I know. Because a bunch of young people in the church, grown up in the church, are leaving. They're leaving the church. In fact, there's been a ton of studies that have been done on this topic, okay? My friend Jay Warner Wallace, on his website, Cold Case Christianity, he cites, I think, like 50 different studies on this question. Why are young people leaving the church? And Barna Research, they did a study on this a number of years ago. And Christianity Today summarized the top 6 reasons why young people leave the church. And I mean, they're kind of the reasons we might expect. Some say, man, isolation. Feel so isolated from the rest of the world, like all, you know, the world's ideas we weren't allowed to even entertain. And so, you know, maybe those things are true, and so they leave to explore those. Or maybe shallowness. You know, the church just isn't relevant. What it's saying isn't relevant to my life. That's what some were saying. Or you know, the church is anti-science, they'll say. It's not compatible. Science is not compatible with faith. Or maybe it's a question about sex. They charge us, you know, the church has a very narrow view of sex, and so we're called things like bigots and homophobic and these kind of things. Exclusivity. How can you say that Jesus is the only way? It's a huge question. And then the last thing they put is doubters. They said that doubt is one of the top 6 reasons why young people leave the faith. They have questions, but they're not given any answers. And so we see here that there's a problem. In fact, what David Kinnaman, the president of Barna Research, found is that 3 in 5 young people who grow up in the church end up leaving the church by the age of 15. 15, 3 in 5. That's kind of alarming, right? And it's the age of 15 because we used to think, man, it's university, it's college, they go off, they meet that like atheist professor, and that professor talks them out of their faith. But they don't need to talk to a university professor to get talked out of their faith, okay? All they need is to open up their phone and start scrolling through TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, and they're bombarded by challenges that'll either argue them or ridicule them out of their faith. I don't know how many of you guys are on social media, but it is like a war zone out there, okay? For example, you could hop on, you know, YouTube, and you'll find tons of videos arguing that you can't trust the Bible. The Bible's full of contradictions. Or you'll hop on YouTube or TikTok, and you'll see, don't you know that Jesus never claimed to be God? Never claimed to be God. Why do you guys worship him as God? Or you'll have videos challenging a biblical view of sexuality. You'll have videos challenging the belief that God exists. You'll have these videos like Rhett and Link. Do you guys know who Rhett and Link are? Anyone? Good Mythical Morning? Well, your kids know who they are, okay? Because they're like the #1 YouTubers out there. And they got this really fun show, but they also have a podcast. And in their podcast, they walk through how they have gone from Christian to non-Christian, okay? They call it their deconstruction story or testimony. I call these kind of videos the been there, done that videos. And there's something powerful. You guys know this. A testimony can be a very powerful thing. Someone can get up, even on a Sunday morning, and share how God has changed their life. And it's powerful. It's encouraging. Our kids are scrolling through YouTube, and they're seeing videos like this that has 2 million views. It's the opposite testimony. It's, I've been there. It doesn't work. It's not true. Now I'm no longer a believer. And it's not encouraging. It's discouraging. And that young person begins to, hey, maybe this isn't all true. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? I can't tell you how many emails I got when those guys posted that video from students and even pastors wondering what to do with it. I got a call a few months ago from a young guy in his early 20s from my church, and he was really struggling with his faith. And he was describing to me how he had just been watching an atheist YouTube video. And he said to me, and these are his words, he says, I wish I had never clicked on that video. That's what he said. And the reason he wishes he never clicked on that video is because it began to raise to the surface all kinds of doubt. And let me tell you this, doubt can either make or break your faith. Doubts can make or break your faith, and he didn't know what to do. Now, I want to walk with you through how I would respond to doubt, and then we're going to talk about doubt, and then look at how to respond to it by looking specifically at an example in the Bible. This weekend, you guys are kind of getting a preview, okay, because we actually talked about doubt a little bit. And here's the first thing that I said to the students, and here's what I want you to hear. If we're going to start to talk about this issue, I want you to understand that everyone doubts. That's the first thing. Everyone doubts. You see, some people think, man, I'm a Christian, I have all these doubts. If I leave Christianity and go to something else, like atheism, my doubts go away. Well, maybe some of those doubts go away, but you can't escape doubt. Because everyone doubts. Doubts come for all of us at some point. I like how C.S. Lewis talks about this. You guys know who C.S. Lewis is? I mean, C.S. Lewis is brilliant. Wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and my kids love those stories. Mere Christianity should be standard reading if you're a Christian, okay? Read your Bible, read Mere Christianity. All right. And here's what he says in Mere Christianity. It says, now that I'm a Christian, I do have moods in which the whole thing looks very improbable. Wait, hold on a second. The great C.S. Lewis had doubts about his faith? Absolutely. But listen to what he says. He follows with this. But when I was an atheist, I had moods in which the whole thing looked terribly probable. So as he's saying the same thing I'm saying. C.S. Lewis, as a Christian, he had doubts. But as an atheist, he had doubts too. And so the first thing is everyone doubts. Doubt is no respecter of persons. It comes for everyone. But here's the second thing you need to understand. Not only does everyone doubt, but not all doubts are equal. Not all doubts are equal. Some doubts are justified and should cause us to change our beliefs, okay? There are beliefs you hold today that you should probably change. And there are beliefs that I hold today that I should probably change. But, I don't know which ones of my beliefs are wrong yet, so I got to kind of wait and figure that out, okay? But it's true of all of us. None of us have perfect beliefs in all that we believe, okay? And so over time, your beliefs change. 10 years ago, I held some different beliefs. But some doubts are unjustified. I want to give you an example. So I was kind of scrolling through TikTok, looking for some videos to respond to, okay? One of the things I do in my ministry, I'll tell you about in a second, is respond to some of the nonsense that's out there on social media. And there's no shortage of nonsense, okay? I'm just saying. And so I'm on TikTok, and actually I think someone sent me this video because I get a lot of people, hey, what do you say to this? And this particular video caught my attention because the title is Top 5 Bits of Church History That Made Me Question My Faith. And this particular TikTok content creator, what she does is she makes videos that kind of talk people out of their faith. That like, here's why, she's explained, here's why I'm no longer a Christian. And this is interesting. Okay, let's check this out. Listen to what she says. I'm just going to show one bit of church history. So you're not going to get all 5, okay? But here's one of the 5. Here's what she says.
Top 5 bits of church history that made me start to question my faith. Number 1, the Council of Nicaea. If you're unfamiliar with it, go look it up. It doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Basically, a bunch of dudes got together, took all the Christian writings that had previously been considered canon, and decided some of these are canon, some of them are not. Who said those dudes got to do this? Who said those dudes had any right? Those dudes. They said it. Interestingly, this all happened way after Jesus died, and not one of those dudes had ever met the man.
All right, so I know that was a lot of dudes in that one. I haven't heard that word in a long time, you know? Now, you need to understand, that video had 500,000 views, okay? 500,000 views. And it had 50,000 people that watched this and said, I like that, okay? The problem with this bit of church history that caused her to question her faith is it's not church history. It is Dan Brown Da Vinci Code mythology, okay? That's what that is. It never happened. What she just described, a bunch of dudes getting together and deciding what books of the Bible are going to be in there at the Council of Nicaea, that never happened. That's not what the council was about. So this person had a doubt, and this is heartbreaking. This is tragic that someone was fed this information and thought, wow, this undermines my Christian beliefs. And so some doubts are justified and some doubts are not justified, and that is one of them. Okay, now you can actually watch my full response, Red Pen Logic, on YouTube, Facebook. I'll just give you this address. If you just go Red Pen Logic and go to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you'll find me there, okay? And then if you're on TikTok, you got to go to Original Mr. B. My kids, when I was a student, when I was a teacher, my students would call me Mr. B, okay? So that's why I use Mr. B. So check that out. Now, what is doubt? If we're going to get rolling on this topic, we got to understand what doubt is. Now, a lot of people are confused on this. They think doubt and faith are opposites, okay? That like if you have lots of doubts, then your faith must be really, really weak. And if you have lots of faith, then you never have doubt. Something like that, okay? But that's not true. Faith and doubt is not opposite. The opposite of faith is unbelief, right? Think belief, unbelief. Doubt is something different. So what is doubt? Well, if we go to James, the book of James, what we find is that doubt is a state of being in two minds. The way James describes it is a man who doubts is double-minded. What does that mean? You're in two minds. And when you're in two minds, you're unstable, okay? You're unstable in all your ways. And so you might want to think of it like this. Imagine you're in a canoe. You guys ever been in a canoe before? It's kind of unstable already, right? And then if you try to stand up in the canoe, well, now you're really unstable. But imagine you have 1 foot in one canoe, we'll call that unbelief, and 1 foot in another canoe, we'll call that belief, and you're kind of like rocking back between those two things. That's kind of like the state of being in those two minds, okay? And it's not just affecting your mind, but it also affects like your whole person. It's like this anguish state. There's an emotion that comes along with doubt. By the way, you can't stay there very long, right? If you're staying up in those two canoes, you're going to end up in one or the other, maybe in the water, okay? And here's what you need to understand. Doubt is taking you somewhere. it's not a destination in itself. It's taking you somewhere. Well, where's it taking you? Well, doubt is either leading towards unbelief or it's leading towards belief. And that's why doubt in itself isn't inherently bad, okay? There are times when we doubt, and yes, it takes us towards unbelief. That's not good. That's dangerous. That's why I would never encourage someone, let's all go out and doubt everything. No, it's dangerous. But doubt can lead to a very good place. It can actually lead to a stronger and lasting faith. That's happened in my own life. There are things that I have doubted, and it actually led me towards a strengthened faith in God. Now, it's not a matter of if doubts come, but when they come, okay? Now, maybe you're not going through doubt today, but I'm telling you, if you live the Christian life long enough, you will experience doubt. It's not if, but when. So how can we learn? This is the question. How can we be proactive? How can we learn to doubt well? Well, I think we should go to the Bible for some help. Now, it may surprise you to know that, man, the Bible is actually full of doubters. Think about it. Abraham, Moses, Job, David, Peter, Thomas, they all doubted. And so when you find yourself in a state where you're doubting, I just want you to know you are in good company, all right? Now, what I want to do with our remaining time together is I want to look at the greatest doubter of them all, doubting John the Baptist. You all just failed, okay? Now, you don't normally think of John the Baptist when you think of doubt. Let me read Matthew 11, 1 to 11 with you, okay? And then what we'll do is we'll kind of unpack a couple things in this text, although there's a lot in here. Okay, when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now when John, this is speaking of John the Baptist, when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, here it is, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Now notice Jesus' response. And Jesus answered them, go and tell John what you see, what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. And they went away. As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds concerning John. This is really important. So he's turning away from John's disciples, and now he's going to talk about John. And he says, what did you go into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Behold, those who wear soft clothing are in the king's houses. John wasn't dressed like a king. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you, quoting the Old Testament. And then remember these words, truly I say to you, among those born of women has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. All right, now most people don't immediately associate doubt with John the Baptist, right? After all, he has some pretty serious religious credentials. Think about it. He's the son of a priest. He is a prophet of God. He's Jesus' cousin, right? And if you're still not impressed by that, remember, this is the same John who leapt in his mother's womb at the presence and sound of Mary's voice. This is the same John who saw Jesus and said, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. It's the same John who baptized Jesus, heard a voice from heaven say, this is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased. So all this, this John is the one who asked the question. Makes this really fascinating to study. Now, you probably know kind of the background story. John gets arrested, right? He starts calling out Herod and gets himself into trouble, gets arrested. He's sitting in a Roman prison, awaiting a probable execution, right? And he's wondering if he got it all wrong. Remember the question? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? You know, he spent his life proclaiming that the Messiah would come and burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. You remember that? But the chaff aren't burning. They're partying. In fact, it's a party where John loses his head, right? And so we read these verses. Listen to 2 and 3. Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, here it is, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? There's a lot we can learn about how John handles his doubts here. Here's the first thing. First thing we can learn from John is that we need to doubt out loud, okay? We need to doubt out loud. What do I mean? Well, you know, we're not told what caused John's doubt. Maybe it was the suffering he was going through. You know that in times of suffering, doubts like bubble to the surface in our lives. Maybe it was his false expectation about what Jesus was supposed to do, what the Messiah was supposed to do. And so he's expecting Jesus to do this thing, and it's like he's not doing that. He's not coming in and taking over. Jesus has a different plan. And so maybe it was this false expectation about how God should be acting. Maybe it was fear, or maybe confusion. We just don't know. But here's what we do know. We know that John didn't keep his doubts to himself, okay? And so what I want you to do is follow John's example. Don't suppress your doubts, express your doubts. Don't ignore your doubts, because doubt, when it's left ignored and unanswered, can lead to despair. And so articulate your doubts. You know, some of us, we've been Christians a long time, and so we don't want to tell people when we have a question or a doubt, because we think, well, what will people say? What will people think about me? You know, I'm on the welcome team, or I'm on the worship team, or I got this position in the church. I can't express my doubt. Listen, take heart. If John the Baptist, a prophet of God, can take his doubt to Jesus, then so can you. All right? All right. Now, I want you to listen to this. Sadly, some people's faith has just collapsed under the weight of doubt because they never expressed it. They thought that they weren't allowed to. I want you to listen to Lisa Gungor. She was in a discussion with a friend of mine, Elisa Childers, on a podcast, and here's what she said about leaving Christianity and what caused her to leave kind of historic Christianity. She says, there were some things I started questioning a little bit, but I was told, you don't question. If you question the Bible, if you question the teacher or the pastor, then you are in essence sinning. So I shut down the questions that I had. For many in the church today, confessing your questions is like confessing your sins. And so they keep it to themselves. I'll keep my questions to myself, thank you very much. There's a really cool parable. I read this parable in a book by a guy named Guinness. Really good book. And he says, imagine huge bales of firewood packed on the back of a donkey. And the donkey is then forced to climb a long, steep path on a very hot day. And over time, the animal slows from exhaustion. And then enraged, the merciless peasant begins to beat the donkey even harder. But eventually, the weight and the wounds take their toll, and the donkey collapses to the ground in defeat. And it's then when the peasant beat the donkey to death. Now, I want you to think about how that relates to faith, because a lot of people treat their faith like that donkey. They make it carry the weight of all kinds of stuff that it can't carry. It's not capable of handling. And then when it collapses to the ground in front of us, what does the church do in response? Condemn it. You hear about so-and-so? You hear about their doubts? Hear what happened to them? They were probably never a Christian anyways. You know, that kind of thing. We got to do better than that. In the book You Lost Me, Barna president David Kinnaman, he says this: I believe unexpressed doubt is one of the most powerful destroyers of faith. I think he's right. It's not just doubt, it's unexpressed doubt. In fact, there was a study that was done a few years ago. It was a longitudinal study. They tracked the faith of a bunch of high school students. And here's what they found. They found that 70% of church-going high schoolers report having serious doubts about their faith. 70%. So imagine a youth group at the church here. Just cut out the majority of them. They're having doubts about their faith, all right? And then it said this: sadly, less than half of those young people shared their doubts and struggles with an adult or friend. Half of those kids never told anybody. It says this: yet these students' opportunities to express and explore their doubts were actually correlated to greater faith maturity. The ones that actually expressed their doubts to somebody actually grew in their faith. And here's their conclusion. They ended up saying that at the end here, it's not doubt that's toxic to faith. It's not doubt that's toxic to faith. It's silence. It's silence in the face of your questions and your doubts. Here's maybe a helpful way to remember this. Doubt, when carefully explored, builds faith. But doubt, when carelessly ignored, destroys faith. That's what happens. It's taking you in one of two directions. Okay, the first thing is doubt out loud. Don't suppress, express your doubts. Second, doubt with others. Now, you might even miss this little part of the text that we read, okay? So I'm going to highlight it here. Notice these words. It says, John sent word by his disciples. He sent word. Now, of course, he's in prison. He can't go himself. But I still want to highlight the fact that here's John telling the people closest to him, his disciples, his inner circle, the doubts that he has. His followers. Remember, John's the guy. Jesus, behold the Lamb. He's the Messiah. And now he's telling his disciples, can you go ask that guy if he's the Messiah? Right? You see what's going on there? These are obviously people that John trusts. They're his inner circle. Now here's my question to you. Who is your inner circle? Who are the people that you can trust with your doubts? Like, can you name them right now? Are there names that come to your mind as I'm speaking? Okay, how about this? Are you the kind of person that someone can share their doubts with? Ooh, that hits home, right? Like, can someone come to you and express their doubts, and you're not, the first reaction to you is going to be like to jump all over their throat, you know, like you're there, you're going to have mercy. In fact, this is what Jude says. It's almost like Jude has to remind us, have mercy on those who doubt. Have mercy on those who doubt. And so, doubt with others. We doubt out loud, we doubt with others. I shared this story in the first service. There was a mother that came up to me at our last event. That was in Texas. We did a reality conference there. Sold out. Something like, over 2,000 students, 2,500 students, something like that. And this woman comes up to me and she says, I think I blew it. My son, who's like 10, 11 years old, he goes to a public school. Some of the guys and the boys in the locker room were talking about sex and using some words that she was not comfortable with, and he didn't know what they meant. And he was in the car with mom. Mom's driving and says, what does this word mean? And mom almost drove off the road, okay? And she actually said, I flipped out. She said, I don't want you to ever use that word again. He was asking a sincere question. He didn't know what it meant. And she's like, you never use that word, don't talk. And she came to me kind of almost confessing like, man, I screwed up. Think about it. You think that son, unless they repair that thing, you think that son is going to want to come to mom and talk about sex anymore? Or actually talk about any real question they have? No, of course not. So we need to be a safe place. We need to be a safe place. Have mercy on those who doubt. Third, we doubt out loud, we doubt with others. Understand your doubt and its implication. Understand your doubt. I think we can learn this from John as well. See, John knew what he was doubting and what he wasn't doubting. He knew what he was doubting and what he wasn't doubting. You see, when he asks, are you the one? Are you the Messiah? Or should we look for another Messiah? Notice what that presumes. It presumes that there is a Messiah. Like a promised Messiah. A promise that you can read about from the prophets in the Old Testament scriptures. So he's presuming the authority of scripture. He's presuming that there is a God who would send a Messiah, right? He doesn't throw the whole thing out. He asks a very serious question, and yet he knows its implications. He understands that just because I have one doubt doesn't mean the whole thing's got to go. But what I'm seeing a lot on social media, on YouTube, when I'm watching these deconstruction testimonies, deconversion stories, it's like I found out that, people don't believe in young earth creation or something, a different view of creation. And they go from there, this question or this doubt they have about a secondary doctrine, and they just throw Christianity out altogether. And that isn't right. That isn't rational. That isn't logical. So we need to understand what our doubt is and its implications. Once you understand your doubt, though, try to put it in like terms of a question and then go search for the answer, okay? So our fourth point is answer your doubt. And I actually like how Jesus responds here. Notice what Jesus says, okay? Pay attention here. Jesus says, go and tell John, talking to his disciples, go tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. Go tell John what you see and hear. He doesn't tell John, hey, John, just look inside your heart for some like subjective inner feeling, and maybe that doubt will go away. He doesn't say, you know what, John, just push that doubt real deep into the ground, and just stomp it out or bury it. No, he doesn't do that either. He says, he points to objective evidence to substantiate who he is. Have you seen what I've been doing? The Messiah is supposed to do these things, like give sight to the blind. I do that. And so he gives him evidence. He answers his doubt. Now, this actually happened to me. This kind of thing has happened to me throughout my Christian life. Apologists doubt too, okay? And in 2018, we had a really hard year. We lost 3 family members and a close friend in his 40s to a brain tumor. And it was just like God, what is going on? It felt like everything. We were losing all these people and almost felt like we were drowning. And I remember the morning my grandfather passed away. I'm on my way to the airport. I'm driving down the highway, and I am overwhelmed with feelings of doubt. You got to understand that the day before, I get a call from my mom, Tim, your grandpa's in the hospital. It doesn't look good. I hang up the phone, and I prayed, Lord, help me, give me strength and courage, boldness to share the gospel with my grandfather. My grandpa was not a Christian. In fact, he wasn't just not a Christian. He didn't want anything to do with it, okay? He was kind of hard against it. And I knew I have a big family. They're all going to be at the hospital, and Tim is going to have to stand up in front of 30 of his relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, all unbelievers, and say, can I say something? That kind of thing. And I don't know why this is the case, but it's always harder to talk to your family about Jesus than a complete stranger. And you guys want to talk about Jesus? Meet me in the lobby after this, okay? But it's harder when it's your family. I don't know why, but that's just how it is. And so we drive to the hospital. We get there after picking up our kids. Elevator doors open. There's my whole family. I'm thinking, great. They're all here. Wish I could have beat them all here. You know, this kind of thing. They're all there. But we're told you can't go in. Well, why not? Because we have discovered your grandpa has tuberculosis. I'm like, what are you talking about? Tuberculosis? Like, yeah, no one can go in. It's like we're quarantined the whole room. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. What are you even talking about? But we're going to do some more tests. And so they said it's going to be 2 hours. Okay, so we ended up taking our kids home because they're young and they were hungry and everything else. I get home and I'm like, I need to talk to my grandpa. I'm flying to Texas tomorrow for this conference. I need to talk to him. So I turn around, drive back to the hospital, go up the elevator doors open, no one's there in the lobby. I'm thinking, this is the worst, okay? They're all in the room. Go to the nurse's station. Can I go and see my grandpa? And they're like, no. We're still not letting anybody in. Anyways, I end up kind of forcing my way in. I'll say I argued persuasively that I was going in whether they like it or not. And it turns out my whole family, they weren't in the room. They had gone to dinner. So this was an opportunity where I got to spend an hour and a half with my grandpa sharing the gospel. Of course, I had a hazmat suit on. They made me put on this is before the pandemic, right? Goggles and shield and the whole thing. In fact, I'm like, Grandpa, it's me, okay? And you wouldn't believe it. The first thing I said to him was, we need to talk about where you're going to spend eternity. That's what we're talking about. Not hockey. I like talking about hockey, but we're not talking about hockey. And that's what we did for an hour and a half. And he was like, you'd be surprised. When you're dying, you're looking for a lifeline, okay? And he was totally willing to receive the gospel. It's one of those moments where I didn't think I'm like, do you even get what I'm saying? This is too easy, you know? Where's the objections? But he received the gospel. And the next day, I'm driving down the airport to the airport, and this echo in my mind is saying, who are you to talk about eternal life with a dying man? How can you be so sure where he's going to go? Who do you think you are? What do you think you know? And I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to answer my doubts. So what'd that look like? It's true, I don't know everything, but I do know some things. Doesn't mean I don't know anything. Well, what do I know? I know that truth exists. Let's start at the bottom. Because to deny truth, you have to affirm it, right? So, I mean, even you could ask the question, if someone says there is no truth, just ask them, is that true, right? Of course there's truth. Okay, if there's truth, is it true that God exists? How do I know God exists? Because there's really good evidence that God exists. There's evidence from the fine-tuning of the universe, from the origin of the universe, from the origin of life, morality. I mean, there's all these really cool reasons when you do some digging to believe that God exists. Okay, but which God? How about the God that raised from the dead? There is good evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. How do I know these things? Is it because I'm special? No, it's not because I'm special. Well, I am special, but it's not because I'm special. Is it because I have some secret insight that no one else knows about? No. It's because these are the best explanations of reality. I know these things because they fit the world. In other words, they're true. And so we answer our doubt. We doubt out loud. We doubt with others. We understand our doubt and then try to answer it. And here's the final thing. I want you to understand that Jesus can handle your doubts. He can handle your doubts. We read all the way to verse 11 because I love this. Jesus says, truly I say to you, among those born of women has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. This happens after John has expressed his doubt. It's almost like Jesus was making sure everybody knew, right? You know, that John guy who who just expressed that doubt, are you the Messiah or should we look for another? Well, there's no one greater than him. So he pays him this compliment. If Jesus can handle John's doubt, he can handle yours. And so we're going to remember that everyone doubts, but not all doubts are equal. And so when you have doubts, see if they're justified or not. If they are, then maybe you need to change your beliefs. But if they're not, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Let me leave you with this final illustration. I'll get the worship team, Heritage, to come back up here. I have a friend, his name's Mike, and he used to fly CF-18 fighter planes, okay, for the Royal Canadian Air Force. I know what you're thinking. Yes, Canada has an Air Force. We do. Probably like 3 planes, but okay, we have an air. And so he used to fly these really cool fighter planes. And when he was getting trained, his co-pilot, we were flying over northern Canada, his co-pilot put the plane into an evasive maneuver, and his job was to recover from it. And so they did that, and his co-pilot was like, Mike, are you okay? And Mike's like, yeah, why? And he said, because we're flying upside down. See, Mike had confused the street lights on the ground for the stars in the sky. In just a moment, he was like trusting his feelings and senses and not his instruments. And what Mike said is Tim, if you don't trust your instruments, there can be deadly consequences because your instruments are what anchor you to reality. Spatial disorientation going 1,000 miles per hour can be a whole lot like spiritual disorientation in the presence of your doubts. You need to have a strong anchor. So here's my challenge to you. What is your anchor? What is anchoring your faith? Think about that. Is it like, your family's faith? One of the things that you grew up in the church, and so your routine is to come to church. That's why you're here. You do this every Sunday. And after this, you're going to go and you have your routine. Is that why? Is that what's anchoring you in Christianity? Is it maybe your Christian friends? Tim, I have all these Christian friends. This is what we do. This is like kind of our club. And so if I was in a, Muslim friends, we'd be Muslims, but we're Christians. So is that it? Well, that's not going to sustain you either. Maybe it's some personal experience. We'll take it from John the Baptist, who had plenty of really cool experiences, all right? That likely won't sustain you either. For some of you, this might be really bad news. Because if you start badly, you're likely going to end badly. It's kind of like when you have a dress shirt on and you start with the wrong button. You know what I'm talking about? And you don't realize it till you get to the end and one's hanging down here. Oh no. And what do you gotta do? Undo them all and start fresh, right? What is anchoring your faith? If you can't give a why for your faith, you'll never be able to give a why not to your doubts. And so in other words, if you don't have a Christianity that is anchored in what is actually true, like the death and resurrection of Jesus, which actually happened in time, space, history, then you will always be at the mercy of your next doubt. So it's time to examine the foundations of our faith, because a strong faith requires a strong foundation. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for this time that we got to investigate the topic of doubt. Thank you for men like John the Baptist, who can be a model, an example for us to look to for how we ought to respond to our own doubts, the doubts in our lives. Thank you for Jesus' response. Thank you that it's not condemnation, but more like a heart of mercy and grace in response to these doubts. God, I pray that some here today who are maybe suffering or confused or fearful or anxious, who are going through some doubt, that you would meet them where they're at, that doubt would lead them in the direction towards stronger belief and trust in you. We thank you for how good you are. We pray that this all gives you glory and glory to your Son. Amen.